Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katherine Johnson. I'm from St. Cloud State University in the state of Minnesota in the United States. I'm a proud American who still has hope. So I'll start with that. Yes, I'm here with two students from the University of Washington. We're excited today to learn about accessibility in Rome, of all places. My background is working with China, so it was really interesting to hear the comparative perspective between where the situation is in Rome and where we were in China and even where we are still in the United States. So I'm going to just briefly introduce. We have Francesca, who's here in person, and we have Jaya, who is online. So can you two briefly introduce yourselves also? Share a little background information?
Hello, my name is Francesca Espy. I am a third-year student at the University of Washington, studying international studies and law societies and justice. Over
Jaya?
to you, Jaya.
Yeah, thank you both for the introduction. My name is Jaya Field. I'm a senior at the University of Washington. I'm actually graduating in a couple of weeks here. I'm also studying international studies and law societies and justice, and I'm so happy I can join you all virtually. Apologies for not being there in person.
That's great that you made it online. We're happy to have you here with us too. And so I'm really excited because I've had the opportunity to meet both of these two young women, and it's really exciting to see that they're both going into law school and they will have with them this background in disability studies. So with that, I will let Jaya introduce the project that you two took part in. And if you could share briefly the introduction, how it was Rome, and the methodology that you used for your research, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Catherine. So Francesca and I spent 10 weeks together last spring in Rome, and we did this program for part of the international studies major where it was 10 weeks of on-the-ground research, and we focused on access to urban green spaces. So this was, of course, specifically in the Roman context, but I think that our findings and our policy recommendations are very applicable to other European cities, as I hope you all will see. So I hope that kind of our recommendations can be provide inspiration for cities like Vienna and all of the other global cities that I'm sure all of you come from. And so Rome is a really interesting case study in particular because it is the European city with the largest overall area of green space. It's the quote-unquote greenest city in Europe. It's also the capital of Italy, and Italy is one of the first state parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it therefore offers this really interesting opportunity for understanding disability access and inclusion as pertaining to urban green spaces. So Francesca will delve more into our specific case studies, but just some overall statistics here. So Rome has more than 50 major public parks and nature reserves, which are of course essential not only for environmental preservation and the environmental health of the city, but also for public health, quality of life, and social inclusions, not only for the residents of Rome, but also for tourists, people like Francesca and I who are visiting the city and spending time in the city. So the scale and historical significance of these green spaces makes them an integral part of the city's identity. So they blend cultural heritage and this ancient history of Rome with natural landscapes. So Rome is home to over 2,000 piazzas. Francesca will talk about the specific piazzas that we looked at. And the piazzas serve as these kind of important commercial, religious, and cultural hubs for people in Italy. They're definitely a space for social bonding, for lounging, and for learning about the city. So on the basis of this historical and contemporary importance, Rome is, like I said, a model for much of the world. So to speak to our methodology a little bit, like I said, we spent 10 weeks in Rome, and so we started our research by conducting this comprehensive legal analysis of existing frameworks that govern how we think about disability and what kind of frameworks there are to outline disability rights. And so we looked at these at the international level, at the European Union level, and then of course the national, regional, and municipal level. So our focus, like I'll talk about in our policy recommendations piece, is really to find ways to translate all of this down to the municipal level so that city offices can use our policy recommendations as kind of a framework and actually make, tangible, feasible change. And so we started with this comprehensive legal literature review. We also looked at any existing relevant case studies that really study disability access in these spaces. So these case studies and the literature review helped inform our own on-the-ground analysis of Rome and our selection of key sites. As we'll talk about, our chapter focuses specifically on parks and recreation, but this was kind of part of this larger project that looked at several sectors in Rome specifically. So our evaluation of these sites' accessibility was guided by the 6 principles from the Global Compact on Inclusive and Accessible Cities, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the 7 principles of universal design. And so we used all of these things to inform how we were actually navigating spaces, what we were thinking about, and the kind of policy recommendations that we could make based on these insights from scholars, from activists, from practitioners like architects who are actually having a role in constructing these spaces. I'm now going to hand it off to Francesca, who will talk specifically about the sites that we visited, the challenges that we identified to access in those spaces, and the best practices.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Francesca. Take it away.
Yes, so while in Rome, we focused on public spaces, including piazzas and streets, as well as parks, playgrounds, and a recreational facility. Across the streets that we visited in Rome, we noticed that the majority of them are cobblestone streets with very narrow sidewalks. We also chose the Piazza Campo de' Fiori as our case study because of its unique historical and cultural significance and the marketplaces that it hosts every single day. Unfortunately, this piazza is full of cobblestone streets, as is the case with most piazzas in Rome. Furthermore, the market stalls are very close together and often spill into pathways, inhibiting mobility for wheelchair users and persons with other mobility disabilities. The vendors and the large crowds also create an overwhelming environment for persons with psychosocial disabilities. While tactile pavements are widespread across the historic center of Rome, every single one that we saw ended at a wall, making it inaccessible and not able to perform its desired function. An initial consideration when thinking about accessibility of parks is the ease to which they can be reached. Transportation, socioeconomic status, and the perception of accessibility can all create barriers to accessing parks. During our literature review, we found that a case study in Warsaw, Poland, interviewed persons with disabilities and found that 58% of them said that they only use neighborhood parks because greater distance often means greater barriers. In Rome, this is a real problem because as the city has urbanized, newer peripheral units often lack neighborhood parks that are safe, are properly maintained, and do not have physical barriers. This means that many persons with disabilities in Rome are unable to access parks and green spaces close by that are accessible to them. We also found that a lot of the parks that we visited had inappropriate pavement for both wheelchair users and persons with visual impairments because they were ill-maintained and riddled with holes. There has also been a lack of proper planning in the implementation of accessibility features. For example, like I previously mentioned, tactile pavements that end at walls, but in addition, we've also found paths that had columns with chains blocking the path. These are intended to prevent bikes and cars from accessing certain sections of the park, but which also exclude wheelchair users from reaping the benefits of these sections. We visited 2 playgrounds while in Rome, one in a more affluent neighborhood and one in a more lower middle income area of Rome. Once again, we found that these playgrounds were inaccessible to be reached. As seen in the picture, one of them had a gravel pathway leading up to the playground. So while the playground itself had rubber flooring, which accommodates the mobility of children who use wheelchairs, actually getting to the playground can be difficult. None of the playgrounds offered disability parking nearby as well. There were, however, some best practices. As you can see in the upper image, Parco Papaci has implemented both rubber flooring, which makes it accessible for wheelchair users, and they also offer ground level play, which allows children who use wheelchairs to also interact with the play structure. However, they have not implemented any sensory play, which would include children with visual impairments and blind children in the communal play. We also visited a recreational facility while in Rome. Acquagnone Sports Club, on paper, has implemented accessibility features. This includes a changing room specific for persons with disabilities, a chair that can help people enter the pool, as seen in this picture, as well as a gym that is created for easy navigation. However, in practice, barriers persist. The changing room that has been designated for persons with disabilities is only available to them until 2 p.m., after which it is reserved for children. Furthermore, the showers lack doors, which prevents the possibility of privacy. And once again, one must question why there has to be a separate locker room that is accessible for persons with disabilities. Why can't every locker room be accessible? Why do they have to be isolated? Now I will pass it over to Jaya to talk about policy recommendations that we developed in response to these challenges and best practices that we noticed.
Okay, Jaya?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Francesca, for going into that. So as I kind of touched on in the beginning, really the goal of task force work and the goal of our 10 weeks in Rome is to look at all of the existing data, do our on-the-ground analysis, and to end with these kind of tangible policy recommendations that we think can and should be implemented, in our case, at the municipal level. And so, as you can see with our policy recommendations, they're formulated specifically for offices that already exist at the municipal level in Rome, but there are, of course, equivalents in other cities like Vienna. And so, having looked at all of our case studies, looked at the challenges that exist currently, the best practices that people are doing that already exist, we came up with a set of parks and recreation specific policy recommendations. So I will touch on just some of our key policy recommendations that we formulated. So first, for Rome's Office of Projects and Assistance for Disability, we suggested an increase in signage and maps available for persons with different types of disabilities. So in our report, we go more into analyzing from specific lenses, like Francesca touched on, psychosocial disabilities, physical, mobility disabilities, and so this signage would be beneficial for all. So this would include both easy read and braille formats in public spaces, parks, playgrounds, and recreational facilities. And we also recommend creating safer crosswalks. This can happen by adding audio signals and by improving existing tactile paths. So like Francesca said, they run along sidewalks and don't end at walls or go straight into streets like a lot of the tactile paths that we encountered in Rome. Next, for Rome's Office of Special Projects and Services for the 15-minute city, we recommended the expansion of accessible public restrooms across the historic center of Rome and within parks and playgrounds. So accessible here doesn't just mean in regards to disability. There were also many public restrooms, quote unquote public, that we encountered in Rome that had a fee to enter. And so this also means accessibility from a socioeconomic standpoint, meaning that people should be able to enter restrooms in parks and playgrounds without having to pay a fee. And this is especially prevalent if you are a person with a disability. So here this means not only the infrastructure to support people that are not able-bodied in being able to use the public restroom, it also means in that stage of actually being able to enter it.
Okay, we just have 30 seconds left, so can you just really quickly finish your public?
Yes, absolutely. So our last recommendation was for accessible and inclusive playgrounds, like Francesca said. Francesca, do you want to end with our kind of key takeaways you were going to touch on?
We have 10 seconds.
I would just say, this is a list of our key takeaways, but since we only have 8 seconds, I would say the most important thing is just to include persons with disabilities at every stage of implementation and planning.
Excellent. Thank you both. Thank you so much. Okay.
you.